Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, let's wander into a little story hidden in the smoke and snow. A story about why Santa Claus chooses to slip through the chimney every Christmas Eve.
Long ago, long before Christmas lights twinkled in windows, before stockings hung beside fireplaces, Santa wasn't quite the Santa we know today. He wasn't yet the jolly old man dressed in red. He was simply Nicholas, a kind traveler who carried a wooden sack filled with small gifts, warm bread, knitted gloves, and sometimes just a single candle. He wandered through villages blanketed in snow, visiting families who had almost nothing. And though he had no sleigh, no reindeer, no elves, what he did have was a heart big enough to hold everyone's winter wishes. One night, after a long journey through a frozen forest, Nicholas reached a quiet village. The wind had covered every roof in white, and not a single light shone through the windows. It was Christmas Eve, or what would someday become Christmas Eve. He carried a few gifts he'd made himself, hoping to share them with the children who'd been kind to others that year. But there was a problem. The villagers were afraid of thieves. Every door was locked. Every gate was shut tight against the cold. Nicholas tried knocking gently at first, then louder, but the only sound that answered was the wind. He sighed, his breath turning into little clouds of silver mist. He couldn't wake the children. He didn't want to scare anyone. But he also couldn't just turn away. He looked around, searching for a way to deliver his gifts without being seen. That's when he noticed something, a small curl of smoke rising from each rooftop. The night was quiet, yes, yet the fireplaces still glowed with warmth. Nicholas smiled softly. He whispered, "Where there's warmth, there must be kindness too." He climbed onto the roof of the nearest house. The snow creaked beneath his boots, and the stars above blinked curiously as if watching him. Peering down through the chimney, he could see the faint orange glow of embers. It looked narrow, dark, impossible. But Nicholas was a determined man. He tightened his belt, held his breath, and very carefully slid down the chimney. It wasn't graceful. His boots bumped the stone. Soot covered his coat, and when he landed, he coughed softly through the dust. But there he was, standing in a warm little room filled with the scent of baked bread and pine. A small stocking hung by the fire, still damp from snow. He smiled. Perfect. He placed a pair of mittens inside, added a sweet loaf, and tucked in one of his candles. "To keep the dark away," he whispered. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, he climbed back up the chimney and disappeared into the snowy night. As dawn came, the family awoke to find the gifts. The children ran to their parents, shouting about the man from the fire. No one could believe how the presents had appeared. The doors were locked, the windows sealed. So they told each other, "He must have come through the chimney." The story spread from one house to another, from one village to the next, until the legend of the man who entered through chimneys became part of every winter tale. Years later, when Nicholas became Santa with his red suit, his reindeer, his sleigh that flew across the night, he could have chosen any way to deliver his gifts. But he never forgot that night when every door was closed and only the chimneys had welcomed him. And so every Christmas Eve he honors that memory. He slips quietly down the chimneys of the world, not because it's easy, but because it's kind. Because it reminds him that even when doors are locked, there's always a way to reach a warm heart. Some say if you listen closely on Christmas Eve when the fire crackles low and the wind hums through the snow, you can still hear him laugh softly as he climbs back up the chimney, brushing the soot from his gloves. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the air smells faintly of pine and warmth when you wake up on Christmas morning. Once long ago I met someone who carried it in his heart, even when the world around him was frozen. His name was Reinar. It was the coldest winter I can remember, the kind where the snow didn't just fall, it stayed, clinging to every roof and branch like a quiet secret. The air was sharp, and even the northern lights seemed to move slower, as though the sky itself was tired. That was the year I first met Reinar, not yet the mighty reindeer he would become, but a small, quiet one who often stood apart from the herd. While the others ran and played in the moonlight, Reinar would watch the horizon, his breath turning to mist, his eyes reflecting something more than just the snow. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but there was a calmness in him, a steadiness that the others didn't notice, at least not yet. One night during a storm that enveloped the forest in silence, a group of reindeer became lost. I still remember the wind, fierce enough to erase footprints in seconds, cruel enough to make even stars disappear. I searched for hours, calling out their names, but the snow swallowed every sound. When I was ready to turn back, I saw a faint glow moving through the blizzard, not the light of magic, but the steady rhythm of breath and will. It was Reinar. He had gone back for the others. Step by step he pulled against the wind, his antlers weighed down by ice. He didn't speak, reindeer rarely do, but there was a resolute look in his eyes that conveyed, no one gets left behind. When the storm cleared by morning, I found them huddled together, safe beneath the northern pines. Reinar stood watch, frost clinging to his fur, his breath weak but steady. He looked at me, and though he couldn't speak, I could feel what he meant to say. Warmth isn't what you find, it's what you give. From that day on, Reinar never stood apart again. He ran beside the strongest, led the youngest, and when I finally took flight on that first Christmas Eve, his name was called first among the team. He didn't have the shimmer of magic in his fur, but every leap, every pull through the clouds carried the same quiet strength that once guided his herd through the storm. Sometimes when the sleigh lands and the world below sleeps, I still hear the sound of his breath, calm, steady, unshaken by cold or time. And I remember what he taught me on that endless night. Even the smallest flame can light the way if it refuses to go out. The snow carried his warmth long after Reinar was gone, drifting softly through the night skies. And sometimes Santa would swear he saw that same glow dancing in the northern lights, where a spirit of winter began to stir, watching over the world in silence. Long before the sleigh bells first rang, before reindeer ever touched the sky, the winters were quiet. The world slept deeply beneath blankets of frost, and few dared to wander through the long, white silence. But somewhere within that stillness lived something ancient, not cold, as one might think, but gentle, patient, and endlessly curious. They called her Era, the spirit beneath the snow. She moved where the frost bloomed, where the frozen rivers whispered beneath their icy skins. Her touch could hush a storm, calm a drifting wind, or make the air shimmer like crystal dust. For ages she simply watched villages light their fires, watched families gather, and watched a man in red travel from home to home, bringing warmth to those who needed it most. At first, she didn't understand him, this mortal who dared to challenge her endless winter with laughter and joy. Each night she followed his sleigh's faint jingle from afar. From the forest to the frozen fields, her presence would brush against the snowflakes falling behind him, curious but unseen. When he stopped to rest by an old pine one night, the air around him softened, and for the first time in centuries, Era spoke. "Why?" she whispered, her voice echoing like distant wind chimes. "Do you give warmth to a world that's already fading into cold?" Santa looked up, his breath forming tiny clouds in the moonlight. He didn't see her, not fully, only the shimmer of blue light shifting through the air. But he smiled as if he somehow knew who she was. "Because warmth," he said, "isn't only for the living. Even the cold deserves to feel it sometime." For a long while she said nothing. And then she laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but one that sounded like falling snow, gentle and fleeting. From that night onward, the winter changed. It wasn't softer, no. The cold still came as it must. But now it carried something else. The snow began to sparkle more. The nights grew quieter, kinder, as if Era herself had learned what it meant to feel warmth and began sharing it with the world in her own way. When Santa's sleigh passed through the northern lights each year, he would sometimes feel a breeze lift him just a little higher, a whisper, a presence, unseen but known. And though he never spoke of it aloud, he knew Power watched over him still, guiding the snow and stars to light his path. They say it was her who shaped the sky roads, the frozen trails only his sleigh could ride upon. And that one night, when the world was nearly lost in storm and shadow, she gifted him something else, a touch of her magic to help him find his way. That touch would soon take form, a shimmering energy that would give rise to something more than snow or light. It would become the heart of the sleigh itself and call forth those who would build it with their small, clever hands. But that, my dear listener, is a story for another night. The snow had fallen for 7 nights without rest. The world lay still, blanketed in silver silence. And high above it all, Santa flew through the storm until the sky itself began to glow. Some say it was Era's gift, the last spark of her winter light, that found its way into his old wooden sleigh that night. Others whisper that it was born from something deeper. The laughter of every child, the warmth of every home he had visited, weaving together into one quiet miracle. Whatever the truth, that sleigh came alive. At first, Santa didn't notice. He was too busy fighting the storm, the wind clawing at his coat, snow biting his face. But when his lantern blew out and all the world went dark, the sleigh began to hum. A soft golden glow spread from the reins to the runners below, lighting the path ahead, like stars resting on the ground. Santa held the reins tight, eyes wide. "This isn't fire," he murmured. "It's warmth." The sleigh answered in its own way, a gentle pulse, like the heartbeat of something ancient yet new. And through that light, the storm began to calm. The snow thinned, the clouds opened, and for the first time in his long journey, Santa saw the northern sky shining clear and kind again. He landed near a small grove, untouched by time. There, beneath a half-frozen waterfall, he found something unexpected: tiny footprints in the snow. Not human, too small, too light. They glimmered faintly, as if made by something carrying light in its step. Following the trail, Santa came upon a gathering, small figures with pointed hats and curious eyes, working beneath the roots of an ancient pine. They were building toys, wooden carvings, tiny clocks, spinning tops, all glowing faintly in the dark. The eldest among them looked up, startled at first, then smiled as though recognizing an old friend. "So," said the little one, his voice like the rustle of leaves, "you've finally found us." Santa laughed softly, snow glimmering on his sleeves. "Funny thing, I found you before I even knew I needed to." The elder nodded toward his sleigh, still glowing behind him. "We heard its song. It called to us, the same light we've been guarding since before the frost had name." Santa glanced back at the sleigh, now resting quietly under the falling snow. "What is it?" he asked softly. The little craftsman smiled. "Not what, old man? Who? She's alive, and she's chosen you." From that night on, the elves, for that was what they called themselves, worked beside him. They repaired the sleigh when it cracked, tuned its magic when it dimmed, and whispered words of light into its wood. Together, they built something greater than a vessel. They built a bridge between worlds, the mortal and the magical, the cold and the warm, the giver and the dreamer. Each bolt, each ribbon, each golden rune carved into the frame carried a promise that no matter how dark the night, the light would always find its way. As the years went by, the elves made their home in the north, hidden beneath the auroras. The sleigh grew faster, the reindeer stronger, and the bond between them deeper than words. And sometimes, when the snow falls just right, you can still hear the hum of that living sleigh, a quiet song of warmth beneath the cold. Because in every journey Santa takes, it remembers Hera's gift. It remembers laughter. And it remembers the tiny hands that shaped its heart. Long before the sleigh ever took to the skies, the world above the north was ruled by the wind, fierce, untamed, and lonely. It carried songs no ear could hear, and dreams no soul could reach. Until one winter, the wind found company. It began with a herd, wild reindeer, swift as shadows and proud as mountains. They roamed where no path existed, their breath turning to silver mist beneath the northern lights. Among them was one, smaller than the rest, with fur pale as dawn and eyes that caught the stars. Her name was Lyra. While others feared the storms, Lyra would chase them. She would leap into the blizzards, her hooves striking sparks against the ice, her laughter echoing through the frozen valleys. And one night, as she ran beneath the aurora's curtain, the light bent toward her, wrapping her in ribbons of green and gold. Santa saw it from afar. He had come searching for new paths, but instead found wonder. The sleigh hummed softly beside him, its glow answering hers. And for a moment the wind itself seemed to pause, waiting. Lyra stepped closer, curious but unafraid. Her nose brushed the sleigh's wooden edge, and it shimmered brighter in reply. Santa knelt, smiling gently. "There's warmth in you," he whispered, "the same warmth she carries." The elves watched, silent and wide-eyed. Then, without a word, Santa climbed into the sleigh and held out a hand. "Shall we see how far that warmth can go?" Lyra pawed the snow once, twice, and then she ran. The world blurred. The ground fell away. The sleigh lifted, not by force, but by faith. The storm opened like a curtain of silk, and for the first time in all of time, Santa flew. The stars spun around them. The moon shimmered like a silver bell. Below, the elves cheered, their lanterns flickering like tiny suns. When they landed, Lyra's fur glowed faintly, the mark of the aurora still in her mane. Santa stroked her neck, whispering, "You weren't meant to pull, you were meant to lead." And so she did. In the winters that followed, others joined her, strong, brave souls drawn by her light. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, each gifted in their own way, each carrying a spark of Lyra's courage. Together, they became more than a team. They became a promise that even in the darkest skies, there would always be a way forward. They say when snow falls just before dawn, if you listen closely, you can still hear Lyra's laugh in the wind, the sound of a dream that learned to fly. Rest now, and if you dream of the sky tonight, don't be afraid to fall, because that's how even stars begin to fly. The world below was silent, blanketed in snow, steeped in sleep. But through that silence, Santa saw it, a tiny cabin, half buried beneath the frost, where a single candle still burned. He landed quietly beside it, Lyra's hooves barely touching the snow. The elves peeked out from the sleigh, shivering not from cold but from wonder. "Who lives here?" one whispered. Santa didn't answer. He only listened. Inside, a child was humming, a soft, trembling tune, the kind sung to keep the dark away. Beside her, a pair of worn boots sat drying near the dying fire. A woman's hands mended a torn blanket, her face pale with worry. They had little left, not wood, not food, only each other. Santa stood at the door for a long time. He had crossed oceans of snow, carried light through endless nights, yet he had never felt the weight of need until now. The elves looked to him, uncertain. One whispered, "We have no gold, no jewels. What can we give?" Santa smiled, softly, almost sadly. "Warmth," he said, "the kind that doesn't fade." He reached into his sleigh, and from the sack that had once carried only tools and ribbons, he drew something new, a wooden toy, carved by his own hands during the long, lonely nights. He placed it by the door, with a small loaf of bread and a piece of coal to keep the fire alive. And then, before the dawn could catch him, he whispered a few quiet words to the wind. "Let this warmth find them." When the morning came, the girl awoke to the sound of her mother's laughter, soft, tearful, unbelieving. The toy danced in the hearthlight. The bread was warm. The fire burned bright again. Outside, faint tracks led into the sky. That night, something changed in Santa's heart. The world no longer felt vast or empty. It felt connected, thread by thread, by acts of kindness unseen. He looked at the elves, at Lyra, at the stars above. "This is why we fly," he said. From then on, every winter night was no longer just a journey. It was a promise to bring warmth where the world had forgotten it. A promise that giving, no matter how small, could turn even the coldest night into Christmas. And they say, ever since that night, every gift carries a little ember of that first warmth, the one that turned a simple sleigh ride into a miracle. So if you ever find a small gift by your window on a cold night, remember it began not with gold, but with kindness. Snow fell gently that night, thick and patient, blanketing the North Pole in a hush so complete that even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Inside the great wooden workshop, the air glowed with amber warmth. The scent of pine, varnish, and freshly baked cookies tangled together like memories. Santa sat at his workbench, glasses perched low on his nose, surrounded by a small universe of half-finished toys. Wooden trains without wheels, bears missing one button eye, dolls with crooked smiles. The elves had long gone to bed, their tiny snores echoing softly in the rafters. But one elf stayed behind, Tovin, the smallest of them all, his hat a little too big, his heart even bigger. Sir Tovin said softly, carrying a cracked toy drum in his arms, "This one won't sing anymore." Santa looked up from his tools, eyes kind but weary. "Every toy has a song, little one. Sometimes we just forget how to listen." He turned the drum over in his hands. Its red paint had faded, its chords frayed. When Santa tapped it, only a hollow, tired thud came out. "This one's seen a lot of laughter," he murmured. "Maybe it's waiting to hear it again." Tovin frowned, unsure what that meant. But he watched as Santa dipped a brush into golden glue that shimmered faintly under the candlelight, a mixture known only to him, said to be made from melted joy and starlight dust. With patient care, Santa mended the cracks, humming softly under his breath. It wasn't the song of any carol. It was older, gentler, the kind of melody that reminded you of snow falling on rooftops and the sound of someone whispering good night. When the glue dried, Santa lifted the drum and gave it a light tap. A soft thump answered, then another, and then, as if shy at first, came a faint giggle. Tovin gasped. The drum laughed, a tiny tinkling laugh that filled the workshop, bouncing off the shelves and swirling up the chimney. Santa smiled, eyes twinkling brighter than the fire. "There it is," he said quietly. The laugh that never wanted to leave. Tovin tilted his head. But how did it come back? Santa rested the drum on the table, brushing sawdust from his gloves. Laughter never really disappears, Tovin. It just hides in the corners of things, waiting for someone to believe it still belongs. The little elf looked around the workshop at the piles of toys waiting to be fixed, the ribbons waiting to be tied, the dreams waiting to be sent out into the sleeping world. "Then maybe," Tovin whispered, "we should wake them all up." Santa chuckled, the sound deep and kind. "One night at a time, my friend." He lifted Tovin up onto the table so they could work side by side. For hours they repaired, painted, sanded, and smiled. Every now and then a toy would giggle faintly, as if remembering the joy it was made for. When the first light of dawn touched the snowy hills, the workshop was alive again, not with sound, but with a heartbeat. Every toy seemed to hum quietly, as if keeping time with the soft rhythm of the North Pole itself. Santa leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms with a tired sigh. Tovin sat cross-legged on the table, chin resting on his hands, staring dreamily at the rows of finished gifts. "Sir, why do we give toys to children who don't know we're real?" he said at last. Santa smiled at that, the kind of smile that carries both joy and the weight of centuries. "Because belief doesn't start with proof, little one. It starts with kindness. A gift isn't meant to prove we exist. It's meant to remind them that someone, somewhere, still cares." Tovin blinked slowly as if trying to catch every word and hide it in his pocket. Then maybe that's what the laughter was. Not from the toy, but from someone remembering. Exactly. Santa looked at the drum once more, now sitting proudly on the shelf. Laughter and kindness, they come from the same place. The fire in the hearth burned low, painting their faces with sleepy warmth. Tovin yawned, curling up next to the drum as if keeping it company. Santa draped a small patchwork quilt over him before turning to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world lay still, glowing faintly under the early dawn. And somewhere, far to the south, a child stirred in his sleep, a faint smile curling on his lips. Maybe he had dreamed of a drum. Maybe he had just heard it laugh again. Santa watched the horizon and whispered, "Sleep well, little one. The world is full of toys waiting to laugh again." The story began on a night when the wind wouldn't rest. It howled through the eaves of the great workshop, rattling the windows, sneaking through the smallest cracks to nip at the candles until their flames danced nervously. It was late, far past the elves' bedtime, and Santa sat alone, carving by lamplight. He wasn't working from a list that night. There was no name, no address, no order to fill. He was simply thinking. Every year, he gave toys to millions of children. Toys that brought smiles, laughter, warmth. But somewhere deep inside, he wondered. What about the children who never asked? The ones too quiet, too shy, or too scared to wish for anything at all? His knife moved slowly over the block of wood. He didn't plan what he was making. He just followed the shape that wanted to appear. Little by little, a small doll took form, slender arms, a tilted head, eyes closed as if she were dreaming. When she was done, he felt something stir. Not pride, not satisfaction, something gentler. He brushed her hair of golden thread and whispered, "Little one, you'll be for the child who doesn't know how to wish." He placed her on the workbench, meaning to paint her the next day. But that night, a strange thing happened. The air in the workshop shimmered faintly, just for a heartbeat, and when Santa passed by again, he could have sworn the doll's eyes were open. Not wide, but just enough to see. The next morning, he found the doll still sitting there, unchanged, except for one small difference. In her wooden hands lay a single folded note. It wasn't written by Santa, nor by any elf. The handwriting was shaky, childlike, as if made by invisible fingers that had never held a pen before. The note said only, "I wish someone would find me." Santa froze, the words sinking into his chest like a quiet bell toll. He looked around the workshop, but there was no one. No footprints, no sign of magic, only the soft hum of snow outside. He sat for a long time, staring at the little doll. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Then we'll find them together." For the next few weeks, Santa kept the doll close. He'd place her on the table beside his maps and letters, and each morning a new note appeared in her hands. The note said, "It's cold where I am. I can hear singing, but it's not for me. I dream of red mittens. Do you think I'm real?" The words were never signed, but Santa didn't need a name. There was a feeling in them, soft, lonely, and full of hope. He began to notice that the doll would sometimes tilt her head toward a certain part of the map, as though drawn by something unseen. And each time he marked it with a silver pin. By the 12th note, the pins formed a faint curve, a path winding through small towns, forests, and hills, ending near a lonely village by the sea. Santa didn't wait. He loaded his sleigh long before Christmas Eve, carrying only one gift. The little doll, now wearing a red ribbon and holding the last message. Santa didn't wait. He loaded his sleigh long before Christmas Eve, carrying only one gift. The little doll, now wearing a red ribbon and holding the last message. I'm not lost anymore. The wind was fierce that night, pushing against the sleigh, whispering secrets through the rains. The stars above were dim, hiding behind clouds heavy with snow. But the doll glowed faintly in his pocket, guiding the way. When Santa reached the village, it was quiet, too quiet. He landed near a small orphanage by the cliffs. Through a frosted window, he saw rows of empty beds except one. A small girl sat awake, clutching a torn blanket, eyes fixed on the dark. No letters, no stockings hung, just silence. Santa stepped softly inside, placing the doll beside her pillow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doll's eyes blinked once, just once, and her tiny wooden hand brushed against the girl's. The child stirred, smiling faintly in her sleep. Outside, the snow began to fall softer, slower, like it didn't want to disturb her dreams. When Santa left, he looked back through the window one last time. The girl was still sleeping peacefully, the doll tucked under her arm. The faintest golden light shimmered around them both. Weeks later, when the world turned from white to green again, Santa returned to the same orphanage. The girl was gone, adopted by a kind couple from a nearby town. But the matron showed him something curious. The doll, still sitting by the window, its ribbon faded, but its smile brighter somehow. And in her hand, one last note. Thank you for finding me. I'll help you find the others now. Santa smiled, his eyes glistening like frost under the morning sun. Then we've got work to do, little one. He placed the doll back on his sleigh and turned north, the bells ringing softly above the sea. That was the year I realized wishes can travel, Santa said quietly. And one of those wishes didn't come from a child at all. But Santa couldn't sleep. Something tugged at him, not a sound, not a dream, just a feeling. He sat at his desk, sorting through the last letters of the season. Most were familiar. I want a train, a puppy. Please make my brother stop snoring. Little joys, little wishes. He smiled as he read. And then, buried beneath the pile, he found it a plain white envelope. No color, no drawings, no glitter, no return address. Only one thing written on the front, in careful handwriting, for when you have time. He almost set it aside, but something about those words made him pause. He opened it gently. Inside was a letter, short, written in neat script that trembled slightly in places. It said, "Dear Santa, I don't want anything this year. I just need to know if you still visit grown-ups." Santa read it twice, then a third time. He checked the back of the letter, the corners, the folds. No name, no clue. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across his face. "Do I still visit grown-ups?" he whispered to himself. No one had asked him that before. The days that followed were busy, but that letter stayed in his pocket, folded, worn, carried wherever he went. It hummed with a quiet sadness, a kind he couldn't quite name. When Christmas Eve came, he delivered gifts as always, toys, books, laughter wrapped in ribbons. But all the while, that letter pressed against his chest, reminding him there was one stop left to make, a stop that wasn't on any map. So after the last chimney, after the last sleepy smile, Santa turned the sleigh toward the horizon, letting instinct, or perhaps the letter itself, guide him. The stars began to fade as dawn neared when he saw it, a small town blanketed in snow, still asleep, the kind of place where light lingers in windows longer than it should. He slowed the sleigh, scanning each rooftop, until one house drew his eye. It wasn't the biggest or the brightest, but there was a candle burning in the window, not festive, just waiting. He landed softly and stepped closer. Through the window, he saw a woman sitting by the fire, wrapped in a shawl. The room was tidy, quiet. On the table beside her lay a few letters, all unopened, addressed to no one, and a single teacup growing cold. Her eyes were distant, lost somewhere beyond the flames. She wasn't asleep, just still. Santa hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was meant to be here. After all, no name was written, no wish, only a question. So he reached into his coat and took out something small, a bell from his sleigh harness, polished and warm from the journey. He placed it gently on the windowsill, next to the candle. And as he turned to leave, the faintest whisper drifted through the glass. "You came." He looked back. The woman was smiling now, just slightly, eyes glistening, tears catching the light. He tipped his hat, nodded once, and disappeared into the snow. Weeks later, when the snow began to melt and spring peeked through the frost, Santa found himself wondering about her. So he asked one of his old friends, a postmaster from that town, if he'd ever seen her again. The man nodded. "Aye," he said softly, "she passed not long after Christmas." Peacefully, "But there's something you should know." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was the same bell Santa had left and another letter, folded neatly beneath it. The handwriting was the same. "Dear Santa, I wasn't sure if you were real anymore, but when I heard the bell that night, I remembered how it felt to believe. Thank you for reminding me that kindness doesn't have an age. Santa stood silent for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that carried both warmth and sorrow. He left the box with the postmaster and returned to his sleigh. The world below him was already waking, lights flickering on like tiny stars reborn. As the sky brightened to gold, Santa glanced at the horizon and said softly, "Maybe that's why I still read every letter, even the ones with no name." That night taught me something, Santa said, his eyes glimmering like coals in a fading fire. Magic doesn't just come from believing, it comes from remembering. And there was once a Christmas when I almost forgot. The snow that year fell late. The sky was heavy with gray, and the wind carried the smell of rain instead of pine. The workshop was quiet, too quiet. Even the elves spoke softly, as if the air itself didn't want to wake the season. Santa sat by the fire, his list spread before him, but his pen hadn't moved in hours. He stared at the flames, watching them twist and sigh, their light reflected faintly in his glasses. For the first time in centuries, he felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could cure, but the kind that lives deep in your bones. The kind that makes you wonder if what you're doing still matters. The world outside had changed. Children no longer wrote letters by hand. They sent messages through glowing screens. Fewer chimneys, more locked doors, fewer fires, more silence. And Santa, the old man who once knew every sound of Christmas, felt himself drifting away from it all. That night, when he finally stood, the snow had begun to fall. He walked outside, boots crunching against the ice, and looked toward the horizon. The northern lights shimmered faintly, dimmer than he remembered. He whispered to himself, "Maybe the world doesn't need me anymore." He went to the stables. The reindeer stirred as he entered. Comet lifted his head, blinking drowsily. Blitzen gave a low grunt, but they didn't move. They knew something was wrong. Santa ran a hand along the wooden stall, feeling the cold bite his skin. "No deliveries tonight," he murmured. "Maybe it's time to rest." And for the first time in his long life, he almost did. He took off his gloves, hung them on the hook by the door, and sat on the bench, listening to the snow whisper outside. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was hard to tell. Then, just as he closed his eyes, there was a sound, a faint chime. Not the deep ring of his sleigh bells, but something smaller, gentler. He frowned, stood up, and followed it through the hall. The sound led him to the mailroom. Inside, on the sorting table, there was a single envelope, thin, creased, and dusted with frost. He hadn't seen it before. He brushed off the snow and turned it over. It was written in a child's hand, but the ink was faded, almost gone. The date in the corner made him pause. It was from over 100 years ago. "Dear Santa, I hope you're not too busy. I don't need toys this year. I just hope you're doing okay. You always bring joy to everyone else. I wanted to send a little back your way." Santa stared at the letter for a long time. His breath caught. The room felt suddenly warmer, as if the fire from a century ago still burned faintly between the words. He sat down, the paper trembling slightly in his hand, and for the first time that season, he smiled, because someone, somewhere, had remembered him. He stepped outside again, and this time the sky looked different. The clouds had begun to break, and the faint shimmer of green and gold stretched across the stars. The northern lights had returned, brighter, softer, alive. Santa closed his eyes and let the snow settle on his beard. He whispered, "Maybe magic doesn't fade. Maybe it just waits for us to remember." He turned to the stables. The reindeer were awake now, stamping their hooves, bells chiming softly as if answering his thought. The sleigh gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Old wood, new purpose. He laughed then, low and genuine, the sound echoing through the cold air. "All right, my friends," he said, climbing aboard. "Let's not keep them waiting." That Christmas Eve, the world below didn't know anything had almost changed. The lights still flickered, the carols still played, and children still dreamed of the same familiar joy. But high above the clouds, in a sleigh guided by stars, an old man remembered who he was. Not because the world reminded him, but because one small letter did. And when the night was over, before dawn broke, he wrote a letter of his own. Just a few words, sealed with a golden bell, left on the table of his workshop. The letter said, "Dear whoever remembers, thank you. The world still needs warmth, and I'll keep bringing it as long as I can."
If this story kept you company tonight, maybe let it stay a little longer with a like, a follow, or just by coming back next time. Here, every story waits for someone who needs a quiet night. So when sleep feels far away, you know where to find us. Rest well, and good night from Sleevore.